Good morning, good afternoon, wherever in the world you are. I'm Silvia Breiburd and welcome to Future Ready Next Gen Learners, the Alpha and the Omega. And thanks, British Council, for this great opportunity to share generational insights with everybody. And if you want to continue the conversation, this is where you can find me, my professional learning network, where you can find me 24/7. So do connect and keep expanding your learning. Well, this is time for shout alouds. Ready? Use the chat box. Where do you live? And where do you teach? I'm waiting for your answers. What a great community of learners we have. Learners who want to know about the Alpha and Omega, because this is going to be our itinerary. First of all, I'm going to deal with you with a choice. I'm going to explain to you why is it that I chose to give this title to my presentation. I'm going to share with you some insights about Generation Z, Generation Alpha, and above all, an introduction to Generation Beta. And because of this, I'm going to give you very useful keys for your ELT lessons. And of course, get ready, get your questions ready, because there will be a Q&A at the end of this presentation. So ready? Here we go. All right. So why is it that we are talking about an alpha and an omega? The meaning of the expression has to do with a beginning and an end. A beginning that has to do with a new moment in every class, in education in general, and an end of all paradigms. And if we consider this, we have to focus on the essence that educators and learners are not generic, but that they respond to this, to generational presences, that they are not generationally generic, but generationally specific. So talking about the alpha and omega and essence has a lot to do with doing what works best. So another curiosity here that I want to share with you is this. You know that when we talk about keys, we generally imagine an object to open doors, but keys have to do with patterns. And we are going to talk about patterns of behavior. So ready for key number one. This one that you should bear in mind for preparing our learners for the real world. Okay, mind generational traits. Key number one. All right, what do I mean by a generation? Well, that's a very good question. When we talk about generations, and the concept is not new, in fact, it was introduced like 100 years ago by Karl Mannheim, we talk about a group of individuals similar ages who have been influenced by the major historical events of an era. And when we talk about this influence of those historical events, we talk about glasses that people develop to understand the world around them. We talk about filters, perceptions, ways of understanding reality that generate connection among people who have seen more or less the same historical facts at the same age, meaning at the end of primary, secondary school, in their formative years. This perception of a generational mindset framed through historical facts was studied later on at the turn of the century by sociologists Strauss and Howe. And these sociologists also concluded that there was this shared ethos by people belonging to same cohorts, but that there was an extra element there, which was this idea of a collective persona. Now, when we talk about the generational spectrum, we ELT teachers deal with a number of generations in any institution where we develop our tasks. Here I'm giving you a list of the different generations. And what we can see there is that we don't have a clear cut from one generation to the other generations tend to blur or to fade into another mindset. So we have the names of different generations and those cuspers or in between mindsets that develop and that tend to also give a little shade of difference to those descriptions of generational perceptions. And what is interesting is the approach to technology that they have and how that will, in a way, mark their connection with the world or future readiness. So have a look at that. And let's focus on Generation Z, that are the digital natives, born at the turn of the century, and the alphas that are now starting secondary school, that have been marked by the appearance of Instagram, TikTok, generative artificial intelligence such as ChatGPT, and lately DeepSeek, and any other GenAI. And what is interesting is that in 2025, everybody is talking about Generation Beta, the youngest generation that was predicted to start now. And if we are thinking about filters that are developed because of historical events, very probably we are facing already the development of a generation that will be profiled when they turn to adolescence. So what does that mean while I introduce myself with my grandmother? The fact that we develop filters implies that many times we have difficulties in understanding each other and getting ready for the challenges that the world presents to us. And here I am showing you my youngest daughter, and understanding the generational gap and that we respond to different needs and perceptions is essential for teachers of English as a second or as a foreign language. Remember this as you read the phrase, which word resonates with you? You can use the chat box. Definitely, this idea of times. Think about COVID marking a whole generation of learners. What can we say about Generation Alpha? Well, they have received other names. They have been called the Generation Glass because of the way in which they approach screens and their fragility as well, or screenagers. In fact, they are facing lots of risks that previous generations did not have to face from the point of view of the possibility of connecting with the outer world. But concretely, they are said to be visual, global, and digital. Visual, because that is their preferred way of learning and the one that has been mostly developed in their formative years. Global, because of their connection, virtual and physical, to people from any other part of the world, and digital because of the way in which they tend to use digital devices. And the idea is how we can get this generation future ready in a better way. More connections about this generation, mind their perceptions. This is a generation that has a very fluid way of connecting with ideals of beauty and gender roles, and that has their parents as their role models. And if not, look at my students who tattooed their birth dates of their parents in her hands. All right, so connecting with this generation in the way they want to is essential. And understanding that they have a different way of perceiving the world and living in, let's say, a world that has to do with contradictions is what we see when we approach them and we invite them to do teamwork, because they tend to be collaborative, but at the same time very individualistic about their productions. So bearing that in mind is a generational characteristic that is something that we should attend to. And because of that, because of generational traits, we need to bear in mind, and this is key number 2, generational challenges and what we used to call weaknesses, or other generations used to call weaknesses. And talking about other generations, think about this. Think of something that nobody said in the 80s. I lost my phone. Did you get it? Well, but the idea is this. Technology trains us to deal with the outer world. Using a landline, using a phone like this, a dial-up phone, implied learning a lot of skills that were rehearsed every time something happened, every time we wanted to make a call. Think about this. Learning to wait, learning to defer gratification, learning to be patient. Many skills were developed. And if you think about any other form of technology, you get the same answer. Things that were rehearsed as we use technology. So thinking about that is something that really, really, really needs to spark our attention. So think about this. These generations, the new generations that are facing new stereotypes and biases, and that have to be future ready and prepared for that. And think about AI Tana, for instance, an influencer that is not real. So this question of understanding what is real and what is not and responding to it is another way in which in our lessons we can get our students future ready. Let me share some interesting information with you. Very recent information. This is Common Sense Media that in 2025, January 2025, shared some research with the youngest generations. In this case, 1/3 of them said that they had difficulty in understanding and what was real in the internet. And because of that, they shared information which was not true. 6 out of 10 really believe that companies related to social media were not going to protect them. And more than that, 3 out of 4 believed that many more things should be done from the point of view of schools and states to protect them. Something that I could experience with my own students, giving me their cell phones just to be able to concentrate more, to pay more attention in class. So this universal characteristic is something that we should bear in mind when we think of lessons that engage them and at the same time allow them to be future ready. Key number 3, mind your visuals. As you can see, my presentation is an example of a presentation in which you have a lot of information, but in which you pay a lot of attention to visuals. Because as John Medina has said, vision trumps all other senses. And we need to work on our visuals to be able to communicate better with this generation. And use visuals to generate more learning, because in that way they can show their skills, their abilities. It is their preferred learning style. Even though they may not all be visual learners, they may even prefer this kind of work in which images are prioritized. But then let's talk a little bit about podcasts too. Look at this, how we can turn images to tell stories, to place stories into memes, or to expand memes or larger stories, or even a critical essay, right? An argumentative essay. Look at ways in which we can work on the ideas, and sometimes just borrowing ideas from their social media, from their world, helps us engage them better and prepare them for the world they have to face. Look at this. We have all been there. As teachers, we know that this is true and that this is something that our students tend to experience. Okay, let's put that into language. Let's expand on that. Let's write about that. For sure, they will have lots of exposure. But mind you, I'm just giving you ideas. You're all professional teachers. You know, you're educators, so you know better. Adapt this to your own realities. So you could use this structure and get things like this, expanding on the different steps and explaining how to get an A on a final exam, or something like this, how to become an influencer. It's always adapting, working on those memes and stories that are relevant to them, that are visual, and that imply possibilities of producing different instances of language and discussing situations that are relevant to them. And that could apply to any subject, any situation. And look at this, retelling a story through a meme. Again, a visual exercise of creativity, imagination, and real content. Key number 4, mind your questions. Ready for a challenge? Real or fake? What about number 2? Real or fake? Let me go back to number 1 so that I give you an answer. Yes, this is fake. I blurred the eyes, so that it was not that clear to see that. But what about this one? Real or fake? What if I told you that that's me at the age of 6 months? Again, does that make it a real picture, a real image? So it's not about the image itself or the information, it's about the questions that you make yourselves. For those who were thinking about, what does she mean by real? You were right. Questioning becomes essential in this moment, and getting students to get the right questions is a way of preparing them for the future they will have to face, in which they will have to face an alpha and an omega, things that will stay, but things that will change. So let's analyze the power of questions and how we can deal with that. Okay, this one is easy to do. In your classes, instead of asking any questions, change your question to make 2 questions. Get students to make 2 questions. And that can be applied after sorting or just giving out a task, assigning some homework, or discussing the ugly duckling. And mind you, I've done that with 6-year-olds, and you cannot imagine their questions at the end of the tale when they want to know, for instance, how is it that one egg went into the nest and not the other, or just why the ducklings ill-treated the ugly one. So interesting. Another thing that we tend to do in our classes, and I'm sure that you've been there and you can say, yes, I use it in the chat box. From this or that to the 5 whys, like instead of having just an activity in which students say what they prefer, like chocolate or ice cream, they can keep digging into that through 5 whys. Well, why is it that you do that? Why is it that you prefer this place to the other? And once they provide an answer, let's get another why there to see whether they can provide a further answer until they get to 5 whys and they are the winners. Why is it? Clearly, because each why implies a new layer of depth, and we are getting them to think higher order thinking skills. From affirming in our classes and in a flexible mindset class, in a flexible mindset ELT class, think of, instead of saying it's like this, just making room for more what ifs. And when we give students a challenge or a task, why not telling them or just giving them the possibility of making what if and providing ways of learning the same things in their way. So what if has to do with an exercise of possibility, of imagination, and at the same time of changing realities and empowerment. So very powerful again. And the simplest one of all, every time you find yourselves or your students making a statement that you consider could be probed, why not add the question mark at the end? Let me give you an example. The internet is everywhere, right? Is the internet everywhere? Or internet is providing all the answers? Is the internet providing all the answers? Definitely. When you just turn your statement into a question, you open up a new set of possibilities. Key number 5, mind sustainability, and that applies to you and to your students. When we think about sustainability, we tend to think of the environment, but we are talking about human sustainability. Make sure that you, as is implied in these times of change, the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. Less is more. Many times what we have can be adapted easily to match the needs of the youngest generations. And of course, thinking of new ways of dealing with known material is very recommendable. So the 3 R's apply to our lessons and to our lives as educators. Okay, so why is it that it is important to consider these aspects, to consider the generational perceptions? Well, clearly, because if we know what generations like, we are going to engage them more easily. If we know what they expect, we can get them on board of our projects and we can retain them there. They won't quit. They won't be bilinguals. And last but not least, if we understand what their needs are, we will be able to develop them. So remember that engagement, retention, and development go hand in hand with understanding generational perceptions. Last, I want to share this with you. How much do you agree? This is Socrates. So again, coming from ancient Greece, the Alpha and Omega, the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. Well, I really hope that you have liked this presentation. Here is a slide in which you can think about what we have talked about, and you can use this idea also to share with your students, to revise content as if it were a rally robin or a round robin. Just have a look at the images and check what we have seen so far. I'm ready for your questions, and welcome, and see you in class. Here you have some books that you can read if you're passionate about this. And just to conclude, thanks for what you do. Bye-bye.